Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It is episode 229. We're in the autumn. It's the second author that I've had on in 3 weeks. Wonderful. Great to talk about shop with authors in the autumn. I don't know why. I know November is the big novel writing, whatever they call that, nano, something like that. I've never done it. I usually have a novel that I'm deeply in the midst of. I'm writing the first, I'm writing them at the same time my Mothman novel trilogy, which are the companions to the escape room, Mothman 66 escape room in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which is still 5-star. All the reviews are coming in. All of them have been 5 stars. So that's exciting. But please welcome tonight. A truly excellent author. If there's anyone out there who is familiar with the Caleb Carr Alienist novels. Now, the TV series lasted 2 seasons. Luke Evans and some other people, Dakota Fanning, was very, very good. But the novels are a whole nother level. I'll tell you, I posted about Shirley Jackson's The Haunting the other night, and a writer wrote and said, "Yeah, the 1961 is pretty good. The 1990s one stinks, but there's nothing like the novel." This is truly true. Caleb Carr's books are just amazing. And I just published a review of this book here, Dead Beckoning by Mike Cobb, who is with us this evening, and compared it to Caleb Carr. And I do it unashamedly, no blowing smoke, just that level. So we're going to talk about Mike's background. This was his debut novel. My debut novel, 15 years ago, was not at this level. I'll be the first to. I'm getting there. I'm trying to get there. But anyway, welcome. It was great. We had Jessica on 2 weeks. Hopefully, Jessica will pop in tonight. And yeah, we're just going to roll the opening and then we're going to jump right in because there's a lot to talk about with White Cobb. So, welcome.
There exists a realm beyond our wildest dreams, a realm beyond reality that the gatekeepers and guardians have always told us consists of nothing but tricks of the eye, weather balloons, swamp gas, sand cranes, fairy tale myths of monsters, crackpot conspiracy theories, and desperate cries for attention.
We know this realm exists, and it's just beyond the horizon. The preset path, the well-worn walkways where the cynics want us to stay.
Instead, give this a listen. Put on your headphones, adjust your volume, close your eyes, and fasten your mental seatbelts because the twilight-tinged turnoff from reality's alluring highway is looming just ahead.
We're about to leave the plane of the easily explained, couldn't possibly be's, and the no way I just saw what I saw's, for the spaces and places where everything is possible, and if you stay long enough, even probable. We're about to take a journey into the outer realms.
All right. So there is, there's quite a bit of UFO stuff in that opening with music by my son, who's a film composition student at Berkeley School of Music. So he did the composition for us. He's working on our new one, Craig and I, for Sinister Mysteries, episode number 50, which is happening in November. We have a brand new opening. Like I told you, oh man, it's got puppets, it's got news themes, it's got a pirate break-in. I don't want to tell you too much about it, but it is absolutely awesome. We have a cool outro with a puppet as well. We truly went international with the team, and Jeremy's doing the music now, a real 1950s kind of atomic age sort of composition. I'm sure it's going to be amazing. But anyhow, some news broke in the last couple of days, just really quickly. I'm going to read Mike's bio and bring him on. Some news broke quickly that this rumored, there's the Wilson Davis memo from 2002, and all this rumbling, disclosure, whistleblowers, whatnot, and so forth about a retrieval program. I've talked about the standard operating manual and all of that kind of stuff, Majestic 12, many times on this show. Well, they have actually named the program name. Michael Schellenberger, a journalist, spoke to a whistleblower. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Supposedly, right after the election, there's another round of disclosure hearings where Burchett and Luna, that whole group, Marco Rubio, so on and so forth, Adam Schiff, those people who are very interested in disclosure, not necessarily from the UFO point of view, but from constitutionally and otherwise, the American people have a right to know about these projects that are costing trillions of dollars that these defense contractors are doing. So anyway, in November, I'm going to do a show, bring you up to speed, because it's been about 18 months with everything that's going on, what actually happened with Arrow, and nothing here to see, but clearly there is. So James Fox has a new documentary coming out called The Program. That's coming out October 23rd. So this is a cool time. But now let's shift gears. Tonight is historical fiction with my guest, Mike Cobb. So here we go with his bio. We're going to bring Mike on. About the author. Mike Cobb's body of literary work includes both fiction and nonfiction, short form and long form, as well as articles and blogs. While he is comfortable playing across a broad range of topics, much of his focus is on true crime, fictionalized true crime, and historical fiction. Rigorous research is foundational to his writing. He gets that honestly, having spent much of his professional career as a scientist. He vehemently refuses to box his work into a specific genre. Mike splits his time between Atlanta and Blue Ridge, Georgia. So welcome from Georgia, Mike Cobb. Mike, welcome into the Outer Realms.
Joey, thank you so much. It is an absolute pleasure to join you tonight.
We're going to have a good time this hour talking shop. One of my favorite things. So, Mike, it says in your bio that your background is as a scientist. So let's start there.
Okay. So I joke with people sometimes and tell them I have a checkered career because somehow I made it from being a career scientist to writing historical fiction. I have a PhD in quantum mechanics. And I got my PhD in 1980, so that dates me. Spent quite a few years in the chemical industry, and then for many years, for decades, had a consulting firm and helped companies sort of bridge the gap, if you will, between science and business. But I obviously don't write about quantum mechanics anymore, but I do believe that my science background and obviously the rigorous research I had to do helps me do research for my books, although it's a totally different kind of research.
Yeah. Whoa, we have a quantum, a quantum mechanicist.
I know you probably didn't expect that.
I didn't, but it's wonderful. I've interviewed some. It's a big piece of the puzzle that I study. I've read the Dancing Woolley Masters and the Tao of Physics and the everything I could get my hands on that was really for that I could handle and understand. Well, that is exciting. So what point at what point did you begin to write?
So
sorry.
Not technically, yeah.
Right.
So
yeah.
I've been writing. I've been doing creative writing my whole life, really. I mean, I was telling somebody the other day, the first creative writing I ever remember doing was actually in elementary school. I was probably, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8, maybe 8, I don't know. And I wrote a story about hula dancers. I have no idea why. Okay. I'd never been to Hawaii. I have no idea why I wrote about hula dancers unless I found them provocative or something. I don't know. But that's the first thing I ever remember writing. Needless to say, it didn't go anywhere.
And that's okay. I just had a thought. So quantum mechanics is imaginative, it's theoretical, it's big picture, but yet it's very so. Was what made you decide to become, to get into the field of quantum mechanics?
Well, it's interesting. So I majored in chemistry as an undergraduate, and I developed a love of physical chemistry. So the quantum mechanics that I did was really chemical quantum mechanics. I actually my dissertation was studying. I mean, this is going to get really esoteric, but studying molecular charge transfer collisions in the upper atmosphere.
Oh, wow.
So it was quantum chemistry. Anyway, so I was an undergraduate, got really interested in chemistry, discovered that I loved physical chemistry, and then took a quantum mechanics course as an undergraduate. Just absolutely fell in love with it. I think I like the magic of it, if you will. I mean,
Yeah.
it really is. It's mathematical, but it is magical. And I loved that. And frankly, I went through graduate school and got my PhD without the foggiest notion of how I was going to make a career out of it. I was just this idealistic kid and was following a dream because I loved it. And so, yeah. And I guess the rest is history. But I always wanted to be a writer, a non-technical writer. And but it wasn't until a couple of years before I retired that I could really spend the time that I wanted to spend actually writing. And I may at some point figure out how to weave quantum mechanics into my writing. I'm not sure how or when I might do that, but it could happen.
For the younger members of our audience are young at heart, right? I was a dual major in theater and English literature, right? Which is, that's a rebellion. Like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to pay my way through and I'm going to get a liberal arts education and I'm going to do this thing. I'm not going to get my teaching degree. I don't want a net because then I'm going to use it. And I made a career. But to hear you say, like, I really rebelled and became, a chemist, quantum chemist, that's very refreshing.
Well, but there was a part of me that yearned for, let's say, the liberal arts side of things. When I was an undergraduate, I went to a highly technical university, but I bent over backwards. I took a lot of creative writing classes. I took English classes, literature classes, philosophy classes. I did everything I could to ensure that I got a well-rounded liberal arts education at a university that was not known for that.
Yeah. Where'd you go, if you don't mind my asking?
Georgia Tech.
Oh, nice. Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. I got my bachelor's and my PhD from Georgia Tech. Yeah. So anyway.
So percentage-wise, because we're here to talk about a historical fiction, but would you say percentage-wise of what you've written, what percentage falls into the realm of historical fiction?
Well, it actually depends on how you define historical fiction. Certainly, Dead Beckoning is historical fiction. It is a fictionalized account of a true story. And we can talk at some point, if you'd like, about why I wrote that book and how I stumbled upon it. So it is true historical fiction.
Yeah, we're going to do
that. The second book is called The Devil You Knew. The first half of that book takes place in 1963. Second half takes place in 1980. It's sort of a combination historical fiction, crime, coming of age story, if you will. There's a very strong coming of age element in the first half of the book. Sort of think maybe like Stand By Me, if you remember Stand By Me.
Nice, yeah.
So it would fall into the category of historical fiction. I have just completed a sequel to The Devil You Knew called You Will Know Me by My Deeds. It should hit the bookshelves in December. It starts where The Devil You Knew left off, so it really begins in 81 and extends into 82. Technically, that would not be considered historical fiction. Even though it's based on historical fact, I fictionalized it. it would not be considered historical fiction because it's technically not old enough. But I'm not going to stand on convention and and draw a red line in the sand and say, okay, this is not, because I consider it to be, because it is historical. It is 43 years old, and in terms of the time span. So I consider it to be. Yeah, and it's loosely the sequel that will be coming out in December. It is loosely based on the Atlanta child murders. If you
I
remember
was
the Atlanta child
wondering.
murders.
Okay, I was wondering. Well, I'm very excited. I should be getting my copy of The Devil You Knew pretty soon. I'm gonna dive right in. I'm holding a spot for it.
Yeah, that's
But
good.
anyway, I'll gush a little bit over time rather than all at once. I've
That's
done
fine.
plenty of gushing previous. So were you hunting for a project where you're like, okay, now I'm at the time of my life, or did the story that Dead Beckoning is based on, did it find you?
It found me. I love history. The three things that I absolutely love, I mean, I love a lot of things, but three things I love are history, research, and writing. Okay.
That's
And
me,
so I
man.
love when those three things can come together. I was fascinated by a World's Fair. I mean, it was called the Cotton States and International Exposition, a big fair that took place in Atlanta in 1895. And I was actually researching that exposition, intending to write specifically about that exposition. And that exposition, as you know, plays a major role in Dead Beckoning. But my plan was to write about that. I was spending many, many, many hours at a research library here at the Atlanta History Center, researching the exposition and going through newspaper articles at the time, before they were on the internet, going through newspaper articles on microfilm.
Mhm.
And I stumbled upon this murder, and I was intrigued by it. And I started looking forward, and I began to realize, my gosh, this is an unsolved murder. It's a cold case,
Yeah.
and it was never solved. And so I was so intrigued by it that I decided I wanted to write about that. And so basically what I did is I took that story and did several years of research. I mean, it took me quite a long time to research Dead Beckoning. And I fictionalized it, and I wrote Dead Beckoning around that unsolved murder, which technically to this day remains unsolved. Now,
Okay.
I have the benefit of the internet. And I don't want to give anything away in the book, but one of the characters in the book, who was a suspect at the time, disappeared, and nobody at the time knew where he ended up. Because I had the benefit of the internet, I found him by
Oh.
looking at census records. He actually left town and moved to Mississippi. I found him in the census records in Mississippi, and he stayed there for a while, and then eventually his family joined him. I was able to locate the guy. And I love doing things like that. Obviously I had the benefit of technology that didn't exist in 1895.
So okay, so in the book, and we're going to talk in generalities because people need to, even though it's based on history, um, you do solve the. Did you have trepidation around that? Was it like
Around
should I leave it unsolved? Should I, you know?
a little bit, as you know, in Dead Beckoning, I did solve the murder, but I did leave some things hanging.
Oh yeah.
I don't like I don't like reading books or writing books where everything is tied up at the end with a nice bow. I like to leave things hanging. I like to leave the reader wondering about things. which I did in Dead Beckoning, and I did in The Devil You Knew, and then this sequel that's about to come out. I didn't have any trepidation about solving the murder. I did enough research to convince myself that the character that I pinned the murder on, if you will, was most likely the actual murderer.
Right on.
I mean, I did my homework. I spent so many hours for several years every Saturday at this research library, pouring through archives and things, that I think my wife began to wonder, what I was really doing, because I would disappear all day on a Saturday.
I understand. Time just, it's that Einstein time. It just
Yeah.
goes away. The next thing you know, 8, 9, 10 hours are gone. Because it's always great to hear someone who says they love research. That's why I write historical fiction. It's an excuse. I'm doing the history regardless. I'm doing the research. I just,
Right.
in fact, it's better than any long form TV show out there. History. I mean,
Yeah, I love it.
yeah.
I love
So
it.
you make so the man who was murdered was a shopkeeper,
Mhm.
sort of like a sundries general store. His name was Baker Bass, and you make the family so sympathetic. The carnage
Yeah.
that comes when a cold-blooded murder happens, and the son has to grow up more than he wants to, and in the midst of this big exposition, his wife is just devastated and mourning. And how do you leave the house and engage with this one in lifetime event? You do all that. So do you feel a little bit like you gave some vindication or gave some closure down through the years to that family by putting forth a probable solution?
I hope so. I
Yeah.
will tell you that I lived with that family and they lived with me.
Yeah.
I mean, my characters are so important to me. They speak to me and I speak to them. And I felt as if I was sitting right there with them through thick and thin. Um, and yeah, I hope maybe there was some vindication, retribution, um,
Mhm.
redemption at the end of the day for
And
them.
again, not giving anything away. It's not done haughtily or boastfully. The character who carries it out on your behalf um, does so with a lot of trepidation and self-doubt that
Mhm.
carries through with him, which is wonderful. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
that's if you're gonna do it, I think that's the way to do it. Let's talk, Mike, a bit about the exposition, because I'm so fascinated, and I pulled it into my historical fiction and my more fictional fiction. The Columbia Exposition, because you had Mudgett and you had the murder house. And what you have with these expositions is this huge influx of people.
Mhm.
Closest thing I can think of is growing up near Atlantic City, where you have this entire working class population that lives on the perimeters. They don't live the life of the Ivy Towers and the big money, but they keep the machine working. So these expositions were like that. Plus, it's international. So this gives you a great palette to bring in people from other countries, to extend beyond the culture of Georgia in um, past Civil War, so the scars are still real. So just tell me, just talk with obvious joy that you have about that exposition and what fascinated you about it, and tell the audience some cool things that were part of it.
Yeah. So before I do that, let me just say, you mentioned the Chicago Exposition, and well, I'm a huge Eric Larson fan. I realize he writes nonfiction, okay, but
Mhm.
Devil in the White City, to some degree, once I stumbled upon this murder, and I had been studying this exposition in Atlanta, um, and I love the Devil in the White City. That was sort of an inspiration for me as well to write this book. The exposition was wonderful. After the Civil War, there was a series of expositions that took place throughout the South to try to rejuvenate industry in the South, and provide an economic stimulus, if you will. And the Cotton States and International Exposition was one of them, and it truly was an international exposition. There were exhibits and buildings representing business and culture from all over the world. There were also some interesting things that happened during that exposition. Buffalo Bill Cody was in the exposition, actually. The X-ray was demonstrated at the exposition, which was just sort of being developed and invented at that time, which I think is pretty cool. The Liberty Bell was actually shipped down to Atlanta, and the Liberty Bell was in the exposition, and I believe it was the last time the Liberty Bell was ever shipped away from Philadelphia, because they were really, really concerned about the crack that existed in it and whether it was going to withstand, travel, if you will. A personal aside, I'm sitting here in Midtown Atlanta, right smack dab in the middle of the city, and I do walk frequently to Piedmont Park, which is where the exposition occurred. Wow. There's not a lot left, but there are a few remnants. But I love walking through that park and just imagining what it must have been like. And when I was writing the book, I spent a lot of time in that park, just immersing myself to get a sense of place. And it is just so fascinating, and I'm just grateful for the fact that I had the luxury of doing that, of being able to spend time there. And almost all of the detail, aside from the characters that are, some of the characters are fictional, but almost all of the detail in the book about that exposition is true. And yeah,
it has the extra of it's the end of the century, relatively so, and so electricity, you describe it as almost supernatural for people. And just tell the folks, because I think it's fascinating, Grover Cleveland was in Washington D.C., but yet helped to kick off the festival in Atlanta.
Well, he was actually at his home in Buzzards Bay.
Oh, okay.
Yes, they ran a line along the telegraph lines from Grover Cleveland's home in Buzzards Bay to Atlanta. And to kick off the start of the exposition, from his home in Buzzards Bay, he pushed a button which sent an electrical signal down the lines that they had run to the exposition, and it lit up the exposition. Wow. Yes, electricity was a big deal at that time.
Yeah.
And it was so spectacular. The entire exposition grounds lit up.
Wow.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating.
It was like, yeah. I'm going out on the limb here a little. It's like, it occurred to me, it's like, this is what makes this book work. The meta of the exhibition with the micro of the lot, from Baker, his family, up through, you have a whole tier of the law enforcement and the criminal justice system and the witnesses. That's fascinating. Let's move to that. You give a great cross section of the types of people in Atlanta in the time. And you did this. I know we keep using the word trepidation, but it's just the world we live in now. You have a disclaimer about the nomenclature around minority populations. So why don't you take me through that, how you decided, okay, this character is going to represent this point of view, and this one's going to, take as much time as you want on that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I cannot write a period piece and be true to voice. without, I would say, crossing over lines that we would establish today, cultural lines, language lines. You just can't do it. If I tried to do it, it would not have rung true. Okay. Obviously, so there. Let me back up for a minute. There's a section of town in Atlanta that at the time was called Darktown. And Darktown was where many of the blacks lived in the city. There was a little black boy who actually, he was a porter at one of the prominent hotels in Atlanta. And he was the person who discovered Baker Bass writhing on the sidewalk, having been shot. And he lived in Darktown. All of this is true. Okay. So I wanted Darktown to figure prominently in the book because of this kid. I needed to portray among some of the, let's say, the white citizens of Atlanta, I needed to portray the racism that existed at the time. There's one particular chapter, and I won't go into it. For those who decide to read it, it will be obvious to them. There's one particular chapter where that racism really comes out. It was real. I mean, again, I could not write a period piece without being true to that fact. And frankly, some members, at least one member of Baker Bass's family, exhibited some of that racism, and he was called out for it. So, yeah, in terms of, I don't know whether I'm answering your question or not.
You are. Yeah, just keep going. Yeah.
So the police chief, I did a lot of research on the police chief, and the racism that he exhibited. There's a story in the book, which is true, about a black man who they tried to pin the murder of Baker Bass on several black men.
Yeah.
With no evidence, with absolutely no evidence. And there's a story about them basically sequestering one of the men in the attic of the jail and trying to scare the living bejesus out of him. Yeah. It's a true story. I did not make that up. It actually happened. But you know what? I just hate to say it. You know, I'm living right in the middle of the South. Atlanta's, a pretty progressive city these days, but a lot of that stuff is still going on.
Oh, yeah.
It's still going on.
I live in Eastern Ohio, and the things that I hear are breathtaking. Breathtaking. Yeah. Let's talk about the police, because again, this is an interesting time. It's 1895. Detectives, fairly new thing. They're still making the way. So the police are now starting to form this hierarchy. So we have the commissioners. I'm reading Nathan Miller's biography of Teddy Roosevelt. So I was just reading about his stint as a police commissioner in New York, which did not go particularly well. And Caleb Carr, folds him into his Alienist books. But so you have the police commissioners, you have the police chief, who's Arthur Connolly. You have the detectives, who are sort of a rogue group, as detectives are often. And you're the expert about the time period. I'll let you talk about that. And then we have Manley, who really is the guy who we take this journey with. Who's a senior police officer who's sort of caught between, and then you have a really nice smattering of the beat cops. So why don't you talk about that whole process and the delineations there and how that became so story worthy?
Yeah, so Manley was one of the good guys. There weren't many.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look, the police at that time were truly a ragtag, motley crew, if you will. Most of whom, honestly, because they weren't paid very well, most of whom came from the wrong side of the tracks, the white wrong side of the tracks. Okay. They weren't paid well, and they were easily influenced by bribes. The police commissioners were quite corrupt. The police chief was corrupt. I mean, the commissioners pretty much had the chief in their pockets. And the detectives, this ragtag group of detectives, were largely chosen because the commissioners knew they could control them, they could manipulate them. And so there's one particular detective who plays a major role in the book, who was a real guy, by the way, who was just crooked as hell.
Yeah.
And he was in the pocket of the commissioners. Now, the interesting thing about him is, well after the time period when Dead Beckoning takes place, he got in a lot of trouble related to another incident. He was just basically bad news. So I in my portrayal of the commissioners, the police chief, Manley, and this one detective in particular, I was true to character. I was very true to character. I mean, they're true historical characters. Now, the things they do, the dialogue, and various aspects of the book are fictionalized, but the essence of those characters is historically accurate. Now, you mentioned the sort of the rank and file police, the non-detectives. There are two. I find them so fascinating. Two beat cops who this little black kid I was talking about earlier, who discovered the body, and he ran to these two beat cops and told them about it, and they were the first officials, if you will, who found the body. They are just fascinating characters to me. I mean, they were not professional at all, but they were just so typical of police at that time. And they had come from, from, as I said, the other side of the tracks.
Yeah.
And one of them in particular was, I compared him, for those, this will really date me too, but I have compared him to Festus on Gunsmoke.
Oh, okay. Right. I can see that.
You can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know mostly New York City because that's where I grew up in, the 5 Points. And if I'm recalling correctly, there's a 5 Points in Atlanta too? Or am I
There's a 5 Points and a little 5 Points.
Right.
5 Points is right downtown, just right down from where I am.
So demographically, the police, were they like second generation Irish German predominantly, same as in New York?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is really interesting because the prejudice is there. And so now let's talk about, because I'm trying to give the audience, like, we can't talk too much about the story because it's a murder mystery. But we can talk about the elements and hopefully get them excited. So I write pirate novels from the early 1700s, golden age of piracy, and there's so many trials, and the governors preside over the trials of the admiralty, and it's fascinating. And I love to read the trial transcripts and then turn those into, fiction for the audience, but have and I mentioned it in my review, the inquest by the coroners and so forth, and the
Mhm.
court proceedings were very, very real to me, very authentic. So did you read a lot of trial transcripts and
Oh,
coroner's
yes.
reports? Yeah, I could
Oh,
tell.
yes. I
Yeah.
read a lot from that period to the extent that I
Yeah.
could find it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I read a lot about, so there's a fair amount of detail, as you know, not only with respect to the coroner's inquest and everything, but also with respect to the morgue where the autopsy took place. I did a lot of research to get that right. I have this obsession when I'm writing historical fiction. I have this obsession with wanting to get that detail right, because if I get it right, then I'm going to be able to convey to the reader a keen sense of place, and I hope they're gonna feel like they're there in the middle of it. And so when my characters are in that morgue, that dank morgue in the basement of the courthouse, I want the character to feel like they're there with me and with my characters standing there in that. And it's the research to me is the linchpin of getting that right.
Yeah. I agree. I
Yeah.
agree 100%. And but how you deliver it. So let's talk from the level of technician. Like you said, you did months, not if not years, disappeared for whole Saturdays. Your wife
Yeah.
was wondering what you're up to. Okay, no small amount of time. Was it a struggle to we'll talk about your process in a second, but was it how difficult was it to go, no, that's too much, or man, I have this thing, but I just can't use it because it slows down the pace of the plot, or did you organically just have the right amount of research to tell your story?
I think it's organic. I don't think about that a lot. Um, excuse me. I think it's organic. I mean, it does. When I say I don't think about it a lot, it's I realize how important it is. Um, but I do struggle with finding that line between providing enough detail to make to make the reader feel like they're there, and providing so much detail that it slows things down. I'm sensitive to that, and I try to get it right, but I don't worry a lot about whether I'm getting it right. That's when I say I don't think about it a lot, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
It's organic, and
That's
I
kind of
hope I
the
get it right. Now, I can, I have been known to go off on tangents occasionally, but frankly, pretty much everybody who reads my books says they like that, because it provides additional color and additional sort of sense of being there.
Yeah. I think a really smart thing that you did, and I mentioned it in my review, is that each chapter is titled by the character who that chapter is about. So it's very easy to now I'm a guy who travels the world during my pirate novels, and that's not everybody's bag.
Right.
They too many, it's the Game of Thrones kind of thing. Now let's check back on them and on these guys who we haven't talked about in 60 pages. And I try to warm people up. But but I think no, the pacing was there never was, where I went, man, come on, just get on with it. Before
Yeah.
we talk about your specific technique, which is one that I envy because it's not my technique, you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't be able to do it. So it fascinated me that it comes out as well as it does, and I'm learning from you, which is terrific. But so you have the big level stuff, you have the exhibition. It's clear that you know the place, like you said, you were able to walk in Piedmont Park, but yet naming a product or the specific brand of wild turkey tobacco, and just tell us just a little bit about where that comes from. That really makes it.
Yeah.
That really makes it.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to ask you about. Your felicity with the guns is wonderful. Was that
Mhm.
special research? Are you a gun guy, quote unquote, or
I am not a gun guy. That was research that I did, and also the thing about the wild turkey tobacco. And if you recall, in one of the general stores, I mean, there's an enumeration, if you will, of some of the things on the shelf.
Yeah.
I did that research. I mean, and I love doing that research. It's just so absolutely fascinating to study that stuff. And I also, by the way, I spent a lot of time looking at photographs. I spent a lot of time looking at period photographs of general stores. I spent a lot of time looking at what was on the shelves. That visual research is as important to me as the textual research.
Yeah.
So I spend so much time studying pictures. Now, what I don't do is with my fictional characters. I have some friends who are writers, and when they're writing fictional characters, they will find a picture of somebody, and use that as a proxy for their fictional character. I don't do that. I want my fictional characters to be my characters. It's different with historic characters like Manly. I mean, I have a picture of Manly. I have a picture, a lot of pictures of, some pictures of Baker Bass, have pictures of Connolly. But when I am writing a fictional character, I don't want some third party proxy or whatever. That character's inside of me, and I know what that character looks like. But other than that, I rely a lot on photographs.
That, Mike, we have such different writing styles. It's a wonderful, as a writing teacher, that's so important for people to know, right? Mom, right? Somerset Mom said there's 3 rules for writing a novel, but nobody knows what they are.
Right.
And we're proving it. So I, being an actor, director, and a screenwriter, I cast every single one of my characters, and it helps me with authenticity of voice.
Uh-huh.
So I cast them with real people, or if they're a fictional character, I still cast them with actors because that's just how my mind works. Let's talk more about your process. So are you writing simultaneously with researching, or is it research and then writing?
It's simultaneous. Well, let me back up for a minute. And with Dead Beckoning, I did spend a fair amount of time on the front end doing research before I actually started writing. But it pretty quickly became simultaneous. Now, I will tell you that I wrote Dead Beckoning, and then I went back and rewrote large swaths of it as I did research and learned new things. So it's sort of an organic evolutionary process with me, and it's not in series. It's the 2 things are done in parallel.
Right. Are you a heavy outliner? Like, what's your process there on laying out the story?
I'm not. I don't like. Okay, so let me just talk for a minute about characters and voice. My characters live inside of me. They speak to me. That's critical to my writing. If they don't speak to me, I can't write about them. They tell me, and I've said this, I've told people this before, and sometimes they look at me like I'm from Mars or something. They tell me where to take the story.
Yeah,
I
understand that.
I do. So I don't storyboard it. I do have a general idea as to where I want the story to go. I'll give you an example with Dead Beckoning. Obviously, it's a work of historical fiction. So much of what happens in Dead Beckoning was set, if you will. But I did not know how that book was going to end.
Okay.
And I didn't know some of the things that the main characters were going to do and how they were going to react to certain things until they spoke to me and I wrote it. It's just so I cannot, well, I shouldn't say I cannot, but I don't like outlining a story. I want my characters, my books are character driven.
Mm-hmm.
They're not primarily plot driven, although again, with historical fiction, there obviously have to be some things about the plot that are fixed. But fundamentally, my books are driven by character and voice, not by plot.
Yeah, and it works out. It works out very, very well, especially with Manly. Like, I just knew this guy. His defeats were my defeats. I mean, that's what you want, because
Yeah.
a plot or a theme does not resonate with an audience. Character, I mean, that's fundamental. There was something else that I wanted to ask you along those lines. So, or I guess two things that come out of that. One is, so you didn't go into it going, I'm going to solve this baby.
No, I seriously considered at one point that the book would end with the murder unsolved. But as I did more and more research, again, parallel, as I dug deeper and deeper and deeper, at some point I had an aha moment and I said, oh my gosh, this guy did it. This guy did it. I'm convinced that he did it. And that's the point at which I said, okay, I'm fictionalizing this, but I've got to solve the murder
Yeah, that's
because he did it.
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And the
Yeah.
last thing is, really, again, being an actor, this is my approach, director, writer. Steinbeck on the writer side, and innumerable really talented technician actors. I don't think you're a person who makes moral judgments about any of your characters, no matter where they lay on the spectrum. You simply allow them to play their organic role in this human drama.
Mhm. Most definitely. I think good art, whether it's a screenplay or a book, or a piece of music or a work of fine art, I think good art transcends political and social issues.
Yeah.
I'm going to write what I'm going to write. I'm going to write it with the degree of sensitivity that I think is essential, but I'm going to make sure that that degree of sensitivity is done with fidelity to the period that I'm writing about. And and let the chips fall as they may. I don't want to make, I don't write books that have primarily have an underlying social message or political message.
Yeah.
It's just not the way I write. One other quick thing though about you're talking about the chapters, and each chapter is written in a character's point of view. I'm obsessed with point of view. I don't like head hopping. The interesting thing is one of my favorite writers is Virginia Woolf, who head hopped all the time.
Yeah.
But with my writing, I don't like head hopping, and I do everything I can to prevent it. So I want the reader to clearly understand, and this is true of my other books as well, in a given chapter, this is the character whose voice is holding court in this chapter. I want it to be clear that their voice is holding court.
Yeah.
And I want to make it clear that this chapter is through their point of view. And because the minute I violate that principle, then the reader is going to be aware that there's a writer. I want the reader to be immersed in my story and my characters. I don't want the reader to be aware when they're reading the book that there's a writer.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, Mike, that's very interesting because like I said, we both write historical fiction heavily based on research with a level of technical acuity. And I don't do a ton of head hopping, but there are times that I'll split a chapter and change the point of view. It's, you have a pirate ship and you have the Royal Navy. One yells something across to the other. You want to hear that response. So I'll do that. So they're almost like mini chapters, but I totally get that. And I'm well aware Virginia Woolf, raised it to a high art. Let's talk a little, about your routine. Do you have a routine as a writer? Do you write at set times for a certain amount of times? Do you proportion your research and all? Go ahead.
Yeah, my routine has basically flown out the window. I used to have a routine for a long, long time. I had a routine. I'm a morning person, so I would get up at 4:30 in the morning, make my double latte, and sit down and write. And before anybody else was up and out and about, my wife tends to sleep in, so I had some nice quiet time where I could write, and I did that for a long, long time. I have found over the past year, a little over a year, that I'm getting my best writing done when I write, when the sort of the writing angel comes and sits on my shoulder.
Yeah, very
And if it happens at 4 in the morning, that's fine. If it happens, I might write tonight for a little while after we get off of this interview. When it happens, and I'm going to let that writing angel tell me when to write.
That's
And I'm getting better writing done that way. And I split my writing between, so I live in the city and I live in the mountains. And, I can write. I'm in the city right now. I can write down here. I can write in the mountains. I don't need a certain place to give me inspiration. And now I don't need a certain time to give me inspiration. It's just whenever it works.
wonderful, wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful. So our hour is coming to a close here. So so you mentioned The Devil You Knew, which is great. That's already out. I'm going to put all your social media up. I assume people could get your books on the typical places, Amazon and Barnes Noble.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I think they're available through Walmart.com. If you want to buy them on Walmart, they're in some bookstores, but pretty much any bookstore can order the books if they don't have them on the shelf.
Right. So you have one coming to the end now. You're in the final editing stages, or maybe just done if it's coming out in December. What are you working on next?
So the next thing I'm working on is, the one that's coming out in December is called You Will Know Me by My Deeds. That's the sequel to The Devil You Knew, based loosely around the Atlanta child murders, and a it's more than a theory. There's some pretty solid evidence that a group of nefarious people were behind at least some of the murders. And Wayne Williams was basically serving time. He was never convicted for killing any of the children. But anyway, I don't want to get too much in the weeds there. So that's that book. I'm also working on a novella called Muzzle the Black Dog. And Muzzle the Black Dog, I'm just loving writing it. I'm about 2/3 of the way through. I think it'll be about 40,000 words, so it's much shorter than my other books. And it's loosely based around Eric Rudolph and the Olympic Park bombing that occurred in Atlanta in 1996. Much of the book takes place around Murphy and Marble, North Carolina, where Eric Rudolph was discovered. And I want it to be a book where the reader is sort of not quite sure what is real and what is not. If you remember the movie Mulholland Drive.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And where you're really not sure, is this real? Is what I'm watching real or not? Now, it's totally different content from Mulholland Drive, but
Right.
I want that feel. And I'm just, like I said, I'm loving writing it.
Wow. So
And
you
then-
seem to.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. No.
I was just going to say, and then at some point, I want to write a sequel to Dead Beckoning, and maybe that's the next thing that I will do.
Oh, okay. So Manly returns.
Manly Returns, yeah.
Oh, I love him. I will love that. So
I do too.
I guess this kind
I
of
do too.
answers the question, but you seem to be moving further and further to the present. Do you think you'll go further back in time again beyond a sequel to Dead Beckoning?
I may. I mean, I've got. I'm actually sort of tossing around a story that takes place around the same time as Dead Beckoning, a separate story that I may do. I actually, I love writing about that the late 19th century, very early 20th century. I love writing about that period. I also loved, in The Devil You Knew, I loved writing about the early 60s in Atlanta. Look, I grew up here.
Yeah.
I mentioned that there's a huge coming of age element in the first half of that book. And that coming of age element is largely influenced by my coming of age in Atlanta in the
Yeah.
early 60s.
Right on.
And I just absolutely loved writing that, and I love the characters, and I would die for my characters. I would do anything for my characters.
It shows. It
You know?
absolutely shows. But maybe we'll finish on this because we didn't, and it becomes really important. So, as a citizen of Atlanta, as a citizen of Georgia, the rest of the country has these ideas about the South and about the motivations of the Civil War, all of that kind of thing. Do you feel an obligation? Do you feel like you're a voice for your place to set records straight on some things? Do you get involved with that, or is it more you write what you know, and so you know Atlanta?
It's the latter. I don't I don't feel that I need to. I mean, this I'll use this term. You didn't use it, but I don't feel that I need to carry a torch or anything like that.
Right.
I don't. Frankly, Atlanta has become such a cosmopolitan city that I don't encounter many people in Atlanta who are from the South anymore. Or at least not Atlanta natives. I don't encounter many people here. I mean, it's just there are almost 6.5 million people in Metro Atlanta, and it's just not it's not a Southern city anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the movie
Now,
industry came there and really.
the movie industry came here. As a matter of fact, Francis Ford Coppola, much of Megalopolis was filmed right outside my window here. At
Oh, wow.
this, I live in a very historic, 100-year-old building in Midtown Atlanta, and he was here, filming for quite a while, filming his new movie.
He's taken a
Uh,
beating, but I cannot wait
he's
to
taken a
see that.
beating,
Yeah,
and
I can't wait to
gosh, he
see it.
plowed so much money into that movie.
He
Holy
did,
cow!
just like, tomorrow night, my wife's out of town, I'm on my own because it's not her cup of tea, but I'm gonna watch Kevin Costner's Horizon. So to watch these 2 very accomplished directors who mortgage their homes, beg, borrow, steal tens of millions of dollars, and taking an
Exactly.
absolute hammering,
Yeah.
absolute hammering.
Yeah.
I wanna see these pieces for myself and see if the system is punishing them or or if they needed a little of the system's guidance to coach, to help shape their vision. So, well, Mike, this
Sure.
has been an absolute pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine, Joey. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to
You're welcome.
share a little bit about me and about my books.
Yeah, so folks, I encourage you guys know that I do not blow smoke. This is one of my favorite books that I read, and I realized that in the first hour that I was with this book. I said, "Wow, this is amazing. This is great. I can't wait to get Devil You Knew." And of course to read the sequel from that, folks. I'll update you my thoughts when I write my book reviews and all of that kind of stuff. So, Mike, just stay with me as I say goodbye. We got a whole everybody loved what you were doing, Mike, in the chat room. They're thanking you so much for
Very
your
good.
time and your wisdom. And hopefully you're going to sell some books because that's a big part of it. Thank you all so much. MA, sorry you had a crazy day and week. It's been absolutely nuts with the weather of so many friends in Florida. And so hopefully we'll all have a nice, settled weekend. But everyone, take care. Wallace Wagner's back next week, and he's going to be talking about some alternative views of the Bible. And was God? Was he extraterrestrial? So you never know what we're gonna have on this show. It's eclectic like I am. So peace, everyone. Be well.